Most men are trained from a young age to be agreeable, to say yes, to keep the peace, to be liked, to be accepted, to avoid confrontation. It's conditioned into us by society, schools, relationships, media, even our parents, especially when it comes to women. You were taught that being a good man means being easygoing, flexible, non-confrontational. But what nobody told you is that every time you say yes when you really want to say no, you are weakening the very core of your identity. You are betraying yourself in favor of approval. That approval becomes a drug, and that drug has side effects: resentment, confusion, emotional exhaustion, and eventually, a life that feels completely misaligned with who you are. You see, saying yes to the wrong things is not just about making bad decisions. It's about creating a pattern of self-abandonment. Every time you agree to something you don't believe in, don't want, or don't need, just to keep someone else comfortable, you chip away at your inner power. And here's what's worse: the world doesn't reward that kind of behavior, it punishes it. Why? Because when you don't respect yourself enough to draw a line, others will not respect you either, especially women. When a man is constantly compliant, always agreeing, always accommodating, he becomes predictable. He becomes easy to manipulate, and deep down, both he and the woman in front of him know it. She may never say it out loud, but she senses it. She sees you giving your power away for scraps of affection or approval, and the moment she sees that you are willing to betray your own truth just to stay in her good graces, her respect begins to deteriorate. Not because she's cruel, but because you've shown her that your loyalty to her matters more than your loyalty to yourself. And nothing is more unattractive to a woman than a man who doesn't value his own voice. This is where the internal conflict begins. You keep saying yes because you think it will make her love you, but the more you agree, the more disconnected she becomes. The more you shrink yourself to fit her expectations, the more invisible you become. You try harder, you become more available, more generous, more forgiving. You let things slide, you compromise over and over again, and every time you think, maybe this will finally make her see my worth, but it never does. Instead, you fall deeper into emotional debt. You're spending more than you earn emotionally, and your sense of value keeps declining. This pattern is not only unsustainable, it's dangerous. It bleeds into every area of your life. You start saying yes at work when you should be asserting yourself. You start saying yes to friends who take advantage of you. You say yes to family members who drain your energy, and you convince yourself that being agreeable is the mature, noble, and kind thing to do. But in reality, it's avoidance, it's fear, it's a fear-based strategy to avoid the pain of rejection, and that fear controls you like a puppet master pulling strings behind your back. Here's the truth most men never realize: your ability to say no is what defines your strength. Not your muscles, not your income, not your charm, but your willingness to disappoint someone else in order to stay true to your values. That's power, that's courage, that's leadership, because the man who can say no to what doesn't serve him becomes a man who commands respect, first from himself and then from the world. But the process of breaking this habit isn't comfortable, it's raw. It requires you to confront the parts of you that still crave external validation. It forces you to ask hard questions. Why am I so afraid to upset her? Why do I feel guilt when I stand up for myself? Why do I think my value is tied to how much I sacrifice for others? And when you ask those questions honestly, you begin to see the root of the issue: yourself. Worth has been outsourced. You've handed over the keys of your self-esteem to someone else, hoping they'll drive you toward happiness. But they can't, and they won't. This is why overcoming the impulse to say yes is not just about better decision-making. It's about reclaiming ownership over your own life. It's about realizing that every yes is a contract. Every agreement you make, whether silently or out loud, is shaping your destiny. If you keep saying yes to situations, people, or dynamics that drain you, then your future will be filled with more of the same. You cannot change your life by continuing to agree with what no longer resonates with who you're becoming. You must learn to pause, to breathe, and to evaluate: is this a true yes, or is this fear disguised as kindness? You were not born to be agreeable. You were born to be authentic, and authenticity requires discernment. It requires boundaries. It requires the uncomfortable courage to sometimes stand alone in your truth. But here's what happens when you do. Your energy changes, your presence becomes grounded, your eyes become clearer, your voice carries weight. People notice, women notice. They may not always like it, but they will respect it. Because you are no longer the man who trades dignity for approval, you become the man who leads his own path, regardless of who follows. Transformation begins not when you learn how to impress others, not when you gain status or success, but when you reclaim your inner authority. That means becoming the kind of man who no longer seeks permission to be who he is. It's about shifting from external validation to internal alignment. Most men are living in reaction, responding to what the world throws at them, bending to the expectations of others, especially women, saying yes to things that don't serve them just to be seen as agreeable, likable, or good enough. But that's not real power. Real power lies in the ability to say no without apology and yes only when it comes from truth. That one shift, reclaiming your authority, can completely redirect the course of your life. When you start making decisions based on your own principles rather than other people's preferences, everything changes. There's a clarity that emerges when you no longer feel obligated to please, when you finally start asking yourself what you want, what you believe, and what you will stand for. A man without personal authority is a leaf in the wind. He gets tossed, turned, swayed by circumstances, by people's moods, by relationships that are conditional. But a man who has reclaimed his authority is like a rooted oak tree. He may bend, but he does not break. He becomes immovable in his sense of direction, and that grounded energy is what makes him unstoppable. The problem is, most men have never been taught how to trust their own instincts. They've been groomed to conform, to follow, to defer. They suppress their truth for the comfort of others. They tolerate situations that degrade them. They stay quiet when their voice is needed most. And they tell themselves they're being nice, respectful, or mature. But in reality, they are just disconnected from their own inner compass. And here's what no one tells you. When you live like that long enough, you begin to lose track of who you are. You become a stranger to yourself. Your confidence fades, your self-trust dissolves, and the life you're living begins to feel like someone else's design. Saying no isn't just about rejecting what you don't want. It's about choosing what truly matters. Every no you speak makes room for a bigger, more meaningful yes. When you say no to being used, you say yes to self-respect. When you say no to mediocrity, you say yes to excellence. When you say no to emotional games and manipulation, you say yes to authentic connection. That's how you begin to shape your destiny, through deliberate choices, not passive acceptance. And don't be fooled. This isn't about being defiant for the sake of ego. It's not about being rebellious just to feel powerful. This is about sovereignty. It's about standing in the full awareness that your life is yours to lead, not anyone else's to dictate. Too many men think leadership is about leading others. No, the first man you must learn to lead is yourself, and that requires discipline, awareness, and courage. The courage to feel discomfort, the courage to disappoint people, the courage to outgrow versions of yourself that once felt safe but are now suffocating your evolution. The moment you start saying no with intention, your energy shifts. You no longer chase because you no longer need to. You become selective with your time, with your attention, with your presence. You stop entertaining people who only want you when you're convenient. You start making decisions based on vision, not desperation. Women notice that. The world notices that. You begin to radiate something different, something rare. A man who knows who he is cannot be controlled, and that makes him powerful beyond measure. You will find that not everyone will like this new version of you. Some people will call you arrogant. Some women will say you've changed, and that's okay. You're not here to be liked by everyone. You're here to live in alignment with your purpose. You're here to follow a calling deeper than people pleasing. Your no becomes your compass. It becomes a sacred tool that protects your time, energy, mind, and heart from being wasted on things that don't nourish you. You'll start to see how often you used to say yes out of guilt, out of fear, out of habit, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. The deeper you go into this work, the more you realize that most of the pain men carry comes from saying yes too often to the wrong people, to the wrong commitments, to the wrong values, and the healing begins when you give yourself permission to stop, to pause, to recalibrate, to declare that from this moment on, you will live your life by design, not default. You will honor your standards. You will speak your truth even when your voice shakes. You will choose the harder path when it aligns with who you truly are. Because in the end, the most dangerous thing a man can do is silence himself to fit into a life that doesn't reflect his soul. Most men don't realize that when a woman challenges them, disagrees with them, or pushes their buttons, it's not always about conflict. It's about testing boundaries. It's not because she wants to dominate or destroy you, but because she's trying to feel you, trying to see if you stand for something or if you fold under pressure. Women test men not to break them, but to reveal them. And every time you fail to hold your ground, every time you bend just to keep her happy, every time you avoid conflict in hopes of gaining approval, what you're really showing is that your foundation is weak. She may not say it out loud, but she feels it. She senses the hesitation, the uncertainty, the fear underneath your words. And when she feels that fear, she begins to doubt you. Not because you're bad, but because you've shown her you don't truly believe in yourself. When a woman sees that your sense of self is easily shaken, she instinctively knows you can't hold space for her emotions either. You may think you're doing the right thing by being overly agreeable, overly accommodating, or excessively sweet. But what you're actually doing is signaling that her emotions and behavior will always outweigh your principles, that she can cross a line and you'll redraw it, that she can change her mind and you'll adjust your standards, that she can test your limits and you won't have any. And when that happens, the dynamic between you two begins to erode. What started as attraction starts to feel like control. What started as respect slowly turns into indifference or even contempt. A woman wants to feel your strength, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, energetically. She wants to know you have a spine, that you won't collapse just because she's upset, that you can handle the storm without losing your center. If she senses that you change your tone, your beliefs, your decisions every time she raises her voice or pulls away emotionally, then she knows she's the one in charge, and that's not a role she wants to play forever. The truth is, most women don't actually want to lead the emotional direction of the relationship. They want to relax into their feminine energy and trust that the man can carry the weight, but you can't do that if you're constantly seeking to appease her instead of anchoring yourself. You might think avoiding arguments or disagreements will make her love you more. You might assume that constantly agreeing with her opinions, going along with her plans, or adjusting your desires to fit hers will prove your loyalty. But all it does is make you invisible. You become less of a man in her eyes and more of an accessory, someone who orbits her world rather than building his own, and it's not her fault. You trained her to treat you that way by never setting a boundary, never holding a line, never speaking a difficult truth. Every time you had the chance to stand tall and instead chose silence or submission, you gave away another piece of your masculine essence. You need to understand that women are naturally intuitive. They don't always need words to understand what you're feeling. They sense it. If you're pretending to be confident but deep down you're unsure, she'll pick it up. If you're trying to act composed but inside you're desperate for her validation, she'll feel that desperation. And if you're agreeing just to avoid losing her, she'll know that too. That's why standing your ground isn't just about what you say. It's about who you are. It's about embodying conviction in a way that speaks louder than anything you try to perform. There's a massive difference between being grounded and being rigid. Being grounded means you listen, you consider, but you don't compromise your core. You can hear her feedback, her concerns, her emotions, but you don't let them override your truth. You don't let temporary discomfort lead you into long-term regret. You remain calm not because you don't care, but because you care deeply about maintaining integrity within yourself. That kind of strength is rare, and that's exactly why it's respected. The men who try to earn love by abandoning themselves always end up confused when things fall apart. They gave everything, they sacrificed so much. They were nice, attentive, agreeable, but they forgot the one thing that truly matters, authenticity, and authenticity cannot exist without boundaries. You cannot be real if you are constantly shifting to please someone else. A woman doesn't want a man who does everything she says. She wants a man who listens, evaluates, and responds from a place of personal truth. She wants to feel safe with you, not because you're passive, but because you are certain. Because when everything is chaotic, she can look at you and see a man who does not waver. This is not about dominating her or trying to control her emotions. It's about holding space without collapsing. It's about allowing her to express everything she feels without letting it change your identity. That's the mark of a man who has done the inner work. That's the kind of man who doesn't get shaken by temporary storms because he's rooted in something deeper. And the deeper your roots, the more powerful your presence becomes. When a woman feels that kind of energy, her entire posture changes, her defenses soften, her respect deepens. She may still test you, but not to harm you, to make sure that what she feels is real. To confirm that the strength you project isn't an act but a reflection of who you've truly become. Negative emotions have been misunderstood, avoided, and demonized by most men. From the time we're young, we're taught to suppress them, to silence them, to bury them under performance and smiles. We're told to be strong, to stay positive, to man up, as if being emotional is a flaw, a weakness, or something to be ashamed of. But that conditioning has led to generations of men walking around emotionally constipated, angry but silent, depressed but laughing, confused but pretending to have it all together. The truth is, negative emotions are not your enemy. They are messengers. They are internal signals trying to get your attention. They are the alarms of your soul screaming at you that something isn't aligned, and the longer you ignore them, the louder they become. What most men don't realize is that pain has purpose, sadness has depth, anger has clarity, guilt has roots. These emotions are not here to destroy you, they're here to inform you. They show up to reflect a gap between who you are and how you're living. If you feel shame, it's often because you're living in a way that contradicts your deeper values. If you feel anxiety, it's because you're focused on control instead of trust. If you feel resentment, it's because you've been betraying your boundaries in silence over and over again. But instead of facing these emotions head on, most men turn away. They distract themselves with noise, work, sex, drugs, social media, mindless entertainment, anything that will keep them from sitting alone with themselves. But here's the problem with that. What you suppress, you empower. What you run from runs your life from the shadows. The only way to gain control over your emotions is to first allow them. You cannot master what you refuse to meet. You cannot transcend what you won't first accept. And that's why healing isn't about getting rid of your emotions. It's about learning to listen to them without being ruled by them. Most men are afraid of what they'll find if they go inward. They're afraid of the rage, the heartbreak, the regrets they've buried under years of pretending. But the truth is, those emotions aren't there to humiliate you, they're there to release you. Every negative feeling you've been avoiding contains a lesson, a breakthrough, a version of you that's been locked away under the surface. But you'll never access it by numbing out. You access it by facing the discomfort with courage and honesty. You have to understand that emotions are energy in motion. If you suppress them, they don't disappear. They distort. That sadness you ignore becomes emotional coldness. That anger you suppress turns into passive aggression. That heartbreak you never healed mutates into distrust, sabotage, or emotional walls that block future connection. So when you deny your negative emotions, you don't escape pain, you just carry it in a different form. That's why men who seem emotionally stoic often have unexplained outbursts or struggle with intimacy. They're carrying unprocessed emotional weight and don't even realize it. Their mind wants peace, but their body is still in a silent war. But when you begin to process your negative emotions properly, everything changes. You start to understand that anger can be a compass. It shows you where your boundaries have been crossed. Sadness reveals what you've truly valued and perhaps lost. Fear exposes where you lack trust in yourself, in others, or in the future. These emotions are intelligent, they are not random, they are direct invitations into deeper self-awareness, and when you stop running from them, they stop chasing you. They become guides rather than enemies. You start to see them not as threats, but as sacred tools for personal evolution. The problem is, men are rarely given a space to process these emotions. The world doesn't make it easy. If you express too much, you're called weak. If you say nothing, you're praised for being strong. But that version of strength is a lie. Real strength isn't suppression, it's integration. It's the ability to hold space for your darkest emotions without letting them take you off course. It's the ability to feel fully and still move forward with clarity. When a man reaches that level of emotional intelligence, he becomes magnetic, not because he's perfect, but because he's real. He no longer needs to perform. He no longer needs to wear a mask. His presence speaks for itself, and make no mistake, women notice the difference. A man who has done the inner emotional work carries a different energy. He doesn't flinch when she's emotional. He doesn't shut down when things get tough. He doesn't crumble when he's challenged. He stands steady, not because he's numb, but because he's done the work. He's allowed himself to feel, to hurt, to cry, to rage, and then rise. That emotional depth becomes a force of stability. It becomes the quiet confidence that no chaos can shake. Negative emotions are not punishments. They are part of your human intelligence system. Just like physical pain tells you where to direct healing, emotional pain tells you where to place awareness. The discomfort you feel isn't a sign that you're broken. It's a sign that you're alive, that you care, that your spirit wants more than survival. It wants freedom. But freedom doesn't come from escaping your emotions. It comes from mastering the message behind them, from going into the storm rather than avoiding the rain, from holding yourself through the breakdown so you can walk into the breakthrough. Because the emotions you've been taught to fear are actually the same emotions that will forge you into the man you were always meant to be. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. This single realization can completely shatter the illusion most men live under, the belief that if they chase, perform, impress, and adapt, they'll finally get the love, respect, and life they desire. But that's not how the universe works. It doesn't respond to effort alone. It responds to energy, to vibration, to identity. Every man is broadcasting a signal with his thoughts, his beliefs, his standards, and his emotional state. That signal pulls people, opportunities, and experiences into his life that match who he actually is, not who he pretends to be. So if your life feels filled with chaos, manipulation, disrespect, or unfulfilling relationships, the uncomfortable truth is this: that's not a reflection of what you want. It's a reflection of who you've been. Most men think change begins with new goals, a different woman, a new job, a better strategy. But all of that is surface. Real change starts when you shift your identity, when you stop trying to force results and begin aligning yourself with the type of man who naturally receives them. You can't just wish for a powerful life while thinking like a victim. You can't demand loyalty from others while betraying your own values. You can't attract peace while living in chaos. You can't build a life of freedom while making decisions rooted in fear. Every external shift begins with an internal transformation, and that transformation is painful, not because it's impossible, but because it requires you to outgrow everything that kept you comfortable. There's a version of you that's aligned with your highest destiny, but that version lives on the other side of your excuses. He doesn't say yes when he means no. He doesn't allow access to people who violate his peace. He doesn't shrink to avoid being alone. He doesn't entertain women who only respond when he begs for attention. That version of you is clear. He's grounded. He's focused. He doesn't wait for permission to lead his life. And the moment you begin to act like him, think like him, hold standards like him, speak like him, even when it's uncomfortable, that's when you begin to attract what was meant for him. Too many men live in emotional poverty, constantly bargaining with life, constantly compromising with women, constantly adjusting themselves to be accepted. But life doesn't reward sacrifice rooted in self-abandonment. It rewards congruence, when who you are on the inside matches how you show up on the outside. That's when your relationships change. That's when your confidence becomes unshakable. That's when your destiny shifts. Because you're no longer reacting, you're creating. You're no longer chasing what you think will complete you. You've become the kind of man who is already complete. The issue is most men want the rewards of the masculine path without walking the discipline of it. They want devotion without leadership. They want admiration without integrity. They want submission from women without first mastering their own emotions. But it doesn't work that way. You receive in direct proportion to how deeply you've owned yourself. The world mirrors your level of self-respect. So when a woman disrespects you, when people overlook you, when life feels heavy and stagnant, the first place to look is not outside, it's within. Where have you been playing small? Where have you tolerated what you should have walked away from? Where have you silenced yourself to maintain false harmony? Every moment is a choice to either reinforce your old identity or step into a new one. Every time you prioritize your values over validation, you break a chain. Every time you say no to drama and yes to clarity, you raise your frequency. And every time you act like the man you were born to be, even when it costs you comfort, you rewire your destiny. This isn't about pretending. This isn't about faking confidence or mimicking alpha behavior. It's about becoming deeply aligned with your truth. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to dim your light. Before the heartbreaks, the rejections, the failures, before you learn to perform instead of live, that man is still inside you. He's waiting to be remembered and, more importantly, to be honored. But don't expect this shift to be easy. Because when you change your identity, everything around you starts to shift. People may fall away. Certain relationships won't survive your growth. Some women will lose interest, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're no longer accessible at the level where they once had power. That's the price of evolution. You will be misunderstood. You will be challenged. You will face lonely nights where you question if it's worth it. But those moments are sacred, because it's in that tension, that in-between space between who you were and who you're becoming, where the most profound transformation happens. This is about developing such an unshakable internal compass that nothing outside of you has the power to steer you off course. When you're that aligned, rejection no longer breaks you, silence no longer disturbs you, distance no longer threatens you, because you've become the source. You're no longer seeking power. You are power. You no longer chase love. You embody love. That energy is magnetic. That's what changes everything. That's what bends reality in your favor, because your destiny doesn't respond to your pain. It responds to your decision to no longer be ruled by it. The moment you start living as if you already are the man you dream of becoming, the world begins to mirror that version back to you. Not out of chance, but because the universe always rewards authenticity matched with unwavering commitment.